faster than the Tetrarchy had. In Maxentius's defense, he had an army to pay for, and a government to pay for, and infrastructure projects to pay for, and unlike emperors past, he wasn't able to offset these costs with provincial taxes. But still, after 5 years in power, he had pretty much alienated all of his subjects. Now, it should be obvious why he had an army to pay for and a government to pay for, but what of these infrastructure projects of which you speak? If heavy taxation was threatening his political position, why indulge in public works projects? The answer is that Maxentius thought that he was actually shoring up his political position, rather than undermining it. It had been a long time since an emperor, or whatever Maxentius was, had taken a keen interest in the architectural well-being of the capital, and Maxentius figured that that meant he had a golden opportunity to put his own stamp on the Eternal City, provide excellent new public spaces for the population, and leave future generations remembering how great and wonderful Maxentius had been. And though that last bit had to take a detour through Constantine's co-option of all these projects following the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Maxentius was successful in making his stamp on the Eternal City permanent, as visitors to the Forum still marvel today at the remains of the Basilica of Maxentius, one of the largest freestanding buildings the Romans ever built. But though in the long run his projects were seen as a net positive, right now they were too much drain and not enough gain, leaving many of the elites in Rome not exactly adverse to the idea of a Constantine victory. This, coupled with the lingering resentment of the masses who were still angry about the food shortages, left Maxentius in a precarious position politically, which is why Constantine's advisors wanted to wait and let nature take its course. But Constantine was determined to invade, possibly because he knew that God was on his side. Leaving the majority of his troops behind to keep an eye on the frontiers, Constantine marched through the Alps in the spring of 312 with a force of about 40,000 men, representing roughly 1/4 of all his available troops. But, critically, less than half of the 100,000-man army Maxentius had at his disposal. So, it's a good thing God was on his side, because otherwise, Constantine's plan looked a little kooky. But God was not the only thing Constantine had on his side. His 40,000 men were highly trained veteran soldiers, mostly German, and intensely loyal to Constantine. By contrast, Maxentius's 100,000 men were mostly raw recruits, whose loyalty to Maxentius was dubious at best. So maybe Constantine wasn't resting all his hopes on the grace of God. The first Italian city Constantine hit on the east side of the Alps was a fortified town called Segusium, and though it made a show of resisting, there was very little they could do, and soon they were at Constantine's mercy. But after burning down the gate and capturing the town, Constantine demonstrated to everyone, friend and foe alike, exactly what kind of conqueror he planned to be, and he ordered his men to refrain from any plundering. This, of course, stood in stark contrast to Galerius's punitive march through Italy back in 307. Constantine was trying to win a military campaign, yes, but winning the political campaign was even more important. In the opening skirmish of the war then, he had scored a minor victory in the former, but a huge victory in the latter, a victory that would lay the groundwork for the rest of the campaign. The first significant fighting took place a bit further east, near the modern city of Torino, where a formidable contingent of Maxentius's cavalry pounced on. Constantine was able to successfully flank them, and Maxentius's forces were driven off. The defeated horsemen made for Torino, but the inhabitants of the city refused to open the gates to them, forcing Maxentius's men out of the region completely. Constantine then marched unchallenged to Milan, where the gates were thrown open and he was welcomed by a cheering crowd. Yes, the military war was going fine, but the political war was going great. Constantine then remained in Milan for a bit, consolidating his position and resting his men, because though it had been pretty easy going so far, no one had any illusions that the going was going to stay this easy. The first real test came in mid-summer, when Constantine advanced east to face Maxentius's main forward army, led by the capable Praetorian prefect Ruricius Pompeianus, the same man who had been dispatched to Africa to take down Domitius Alexander. Ruricius had holed up in the modern city of Verona, which was easily defensible as it was bounded on 3 sides by a river, and he was essentially daring Constantine to try and dislodge him. Constantine took the dare, and sent a detachment of men around north of the city, with orders to cross the river unnoticed and slip over the relatively under-garrisoned north wall. However, Ruricius was alerted to the maneuver and sent a force in to quash the attempt. But his much larger force was somehow defeated by Constantine's small expedition. This is about the time when God really starts to enter the equation, because Constantine is about to make a habit of winning despite being vastly outnumbered. Then again, maybe it was just a matter of the relative quality of the soldiers on each side. Then again, maybe it was just luck. Thwarted in his initial surprise attack, Constantine decided to follow up with the opposite approach. He surrounded the city completely and settled in for a good old-fashioned siege. Thinking fast, Ruricius slipped out of the city before the clampdown was complete, and made his way south to collect a relief force. The idea would be to bring this force up, make Constantine break away from the siege to face them, and allow the army inside Verona to come pouring out, trapping Constantine between the 2 armies and hopefully destroying him. But as the relief army neared the city, Ruricius discovered that Constantine was refusing to break off the siege, and instead had sent what appeared to be only a token resistance force to halt his march. Okay, so much the better then. Now we get to trap him right against the city walls. That'll work too. And here's where God shows his hand again. Or maybe just where Constantine's soldiers show that they are just flat out better again. Or maybe more luck. Constantine's defense force met Ruricius's much larger relief army, and after a hotly contested fight, utterly routed them. Ruricius himself was killed in the battle. The soldiers left inside Verona, now leaderless and demoralized, decided there was no use resisting anymore, and opened the gates to the seemingly invincible Constantine. In short order, envoys from all the major northern Italian cities, including Aquileia and Ravenna, arrived in Constantine's camp to announce their surrender. Yes, things were going just fine for Constantine. But he still had one major obstacle to overcome, and this was the obstacle that had broken first Severus and then Galerius: Rome itself. The walls of the city had not gotten any shorter or any thinner since those 2 previous emperors had made their attempt, nor was the city any less garrisoned or any less provisioned. A siege seemed hopeless, and there was no way on God's green earth that Maxentius was going to come out and offer battle. Not when he could sit tight inside the city and wait for Constantine to give up. So, what exactly is the plan here? I guess march on Rome and see what happens next? Well aware that Constantine was now on his way, Maxentius ordered all the bridges spanning the Tiber demolished, which would not necessarily stop Constantine's advance, but it would slow him down. Except that Constantine was in no hurry. Knowing he was in full control of northern Italy, he marched south at a snail's pace, letting each passing day add luster to the aura of inevitability he was now bathed in. As summer gave way to fall, the residents of every city, town, and farm Constantine passed cheered him and wished him well and hailed him as emperor. With the anticipation now killing them, the citizens of Rome grew restless, and demonstrations began to break out, culminating with a pro-Constantinian chant at a set of chariot races Maxentius was overseeing. This all had the intended effect, and Maxentius began to seriously worry about his ability to hold out against a siege. The citizens had been with him when he fought Severus and Galerius, but right now, the city looked like it was ready to welcome Constantine with open arms. Plus, behind closed doors, it was well known that the city was not in fact as well supplied as it had been before, as the years of estrangement with Africa had taken their toll on the imperial stockpiles as much as they had the free grain dole. All of this led Maxentius to contemplate a course of action that no one thought he would take in a million years, because, I mean, it would take a miracle to get him out from behind the Aurelian walls. With Constantine finally parked just beyond the ruined Milvian Bridge on the north side of the Tiber in late October 312 AD, Maxentius consulted with his soothsayers to take the pulse of the gods so he could figure out what he should do. As it turned out, the morning he went to talk to them was the morning of October 28, which just so happened to be the 6th anniversary of his reign. These sorts of anniversaries were considered particularly auspicious, and the soothsayers then confirmed with other readings that the enemies of Rome would be defeated on that very day. Maxentius needed no further prompting. He ordered his army out. He was going to take the fight to Constantine and settle this once and for all. But of course, as we learned last week, on the night of October 27, Constantine had made his own supernatural connection, and now believed completely that he was fighting with the full blessing of the one true God. With the magical Chi-Rho leading the way, either posted atop a standard or painted on the shields of his men, his army was truly invincible. That Maxentius was now suddenly and inexplicably marching out of Rome to face them? Well, is that not a miracle of God? Yes, the enemies of Rome would be defeated on that day, but the soothsayers never did say who those enemies of Rome were, now did they? So as you may have picked up already, the Battle of the Milvian Bridge is a bit of a misnomer. After all, prior to Constantine's arrival, Maxentius had ordered all the bridges across the Tiber destroyed, and that included the Milvian Bridge. So when Maxentius's army finished the short march from the Flaminian Gate to the spot on the Tiber where the bridge had stood, he had to build a pontoon bridge of rafts to get his men to the other side. So I think the battle should technically be called the Battle of a Spot near the spot where the Milvian Bridge had been, but where there was now a temporary pontoon bridge. But that doesn't really roll off the tongue, so Battle of the Milvian Bridge it is. Though Maxentius nullified his greatest advantage when he decided to come out from behind the Aurelian walls, when he took the field on the morning of October 28, he still had every reason to be confident, as, by all accounts, he outnumbered Constantine something like 2-1. He arrayed his army in a long line with its back to the river, long enough that hopefully they would be able to envelop Constantine's smaller army. But not unlike the Greeks at Marathon, Constantine decided to risk going to battle with too thin a line, and extended his own to match the length of Maxentius's to prevent an easy flanking move. The two armies thus lined up, Constantine took the initiative and ordered his cavalry to attack Maxentius's horsemen. In short order, Maxentius's less able cavalry was broken up, and Constantine ordered his infantry to advance. The fight that ensued was a bitter one, but short, because it appears that Constantine simply took the field with more talented soldiers, and so Maxentius's army began to be pushed back. Here now, Maxentius's decisive blunder was revealed to all. He had lined up his army